Okay, let's dive right into this by acknowledging a deeply, deeply relatable scene. You're a sleep deprived parent, you're exhausted, and you confidently turn on a white noise machine, fully trusting this universally recommended ritual to just protect your baby's rest. I mean, it's literally one of the most common infant sleep tools in the Western world, right? You buy it, you plug it in, you crank the volume up, and you finally get to sleep. But what if the very tool we're using to protect infant sleep is quietly doing something entirely different to their brain while they rest? Now, what's really fascinating about this is the massive pattern interrupt we're suddenly seeing in the neuroscience community. It's sparking a question that honestly every single parent needs to hear. If white noise is designed to sound exactly like the womb, which is the very environment where language development actually begins, why is the most authoritative new neuroscience suggesting it might be silencing the precise neural circuits your baby's brain needs to learn to talk? Well, we're going to answer that in this explainer, and the biological reason why might completely change how you set up your nursery tonight. So, for decades, clinical observations and those really popular shushing methods of the 1990s convinced us that loud, sustained, womb-like noise was perfectly natural and universally safe. Researchers back in the late 80s documented that the fetal environment is loud. It's filled with the maternal heartbeat and blood flow, producing average sound levels of around 72 to 88 decibels. So the intuitive leap was pretty simple. If the womb is loud, then a silent nursery must be disruptive, and replicating that intrauterine soundscape will magically ease the transition to extrauterine sleep. And since the pediatric establishment didn't explicitly warn against it, millions of us just assumed implicit approval. But a landmark 2023 study from researchers at Harvard Medical School completely shatters that old belief. It reveals that the very tool used to protect infants' sleep might actually be interfering with how their brain learns to hear language. Looking at 342 infants across their first 12 months, researchers found that babies exposed to sustained white noise at high volumes for over 6 hours a night showed phoneme discrimination performance approximately 2.3 months behind their low-exposure peers. Yeah. The machine isn't just soothing them, it is fundamentally altering their auditory development. To understand why this is happening, we have to look at what's going on inside your baby's brain during a really delicate developmental process called native language neural commitment. Essentially, at birth, your newborn's auditory cortex is a universal sponge. They can hear and discriminate sounds from literally all of the world's languages. But to actually learn their native language, they have to undergo experience-dependent neural pruning. They must selectively strengthen the specific synaptic pathways responding to the sounds they hear every day, while carefully fading out the ones they don't. And during the first 6 months of life, a baby's auditory cortex acts like a sponge on a really tight deadline. It progressively prunes and strengthens synapses to lock on to the specific sounds of human speech. By 3 months, the brain begins categorizing sounds, and between 6 and 12 months, this critical window of competitive plasticity begins to close. So this is a very precisely timed biological event. Think of your baby's auditory brain like a giant radio, slowly trying to tune in to the exact stations playing their native language, making those voices crystal clear. Now, to tune into a station, the radio actually needs to hear a distinct signal, right? It needs clear phonemic landmarks to lock onto. It fundamentally relies on the contrast of different pitches, pauses, and vowels to figure out exactly where the station is on the dial. But if you blast 8 to 10 hours of uniform white noise through all the speakers at once, the brain's radio just can't find the contrast it needs to tune into any meaningful station. Because white noise contains energy at all frequencies simultaneously and uniformly, when the primary auditory cortex is exposed to this sustained broadband noise, every single auditory neuron is activated equally. That contrast gradient that the brain relies on to learn language, it's completely eliminated. The scientific term for this static interference is competitive inhibition. It's a mechanism where the auditory cortex is effectively paused because it lacks the signal variation to grow properly. Under normal conditions, neurons compete for synaptic territory using Hebbian plasticity. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Meaningful acoustic input, like your voice, actually drives the release of BDNF, which acts like a magical brain fertilizer, strengthening those specific language connections. But with uniform white noise, there's no spatial differentiation. No single class of neurons gets stronger. Actually, scratch that. It's more like the entire system is just put on hold. To put that into perspective, imagine a classroom where the brain awards gold stars to synapses that answer first. White noise essentially forces every single student to raise their hand constantly. And if everyone is raising their hand at the exact same moment for 8 hours a night, no one stands out. The auditory cortex remains in this state of undifferentiated activation. Time spent in sustained white noise is simply time where this absolutely vital calibration process is not advancing. Okay, so take a deep breath. Before panic sets in, the absolutely crucial point here is that this risk is entirely dose dependent and volume dependent. This is not a story about irreversible damage. It's a story about optimization. It's about understanding what the delicate auditory cortex needs and just providing it a bit more precisely. So let's look at the exact thresholds that separate safe sleep support from developmental delay. The reassuring reality is that the data shows keeping the volume at or below 50 decibels, which is basically the level of a quiet conversation, shows absolutely no measurable developmental harm. At this low volume, the white noise provides a super helpful masking effect on sudden environmental sounds, like a dog barking or a door shutting down the hall, but without completely dominating the auditory cortex's activation pattern. The brain can still perfectly detect contrast. However, the Harvard-affiliated study showed that babies consistently exposed to volumes over 55 decibels for 6 or more hours a night exhibited a 15% smaller vocabulary size at 12 months. Furthermore, their language comprehension at 18 months remained measurably below their low-exposure peers, and that's even after controlling for socioeconomic status and maternal education. So the takeaway? Duration matters significantly when the volume crosses that 55 decibel threshold. It's kind of like trying to learn the alphabet while a TV blares in the background. The noise isn't inherently toxic, it's simply too loud for too long for the delicate language lessons to get through. Your baby's brain hears the TV, not the alphabet. Again, it doesn't break the door of the critical learning window, but it does waste valuable time while that door is wide open. Which brings us to what we can actually do about it. Section 1. The Safe Sleep Protocol, Evidence-Based Guardrails for Parents. Let's step firmly into the no-guilt zone and look at the precise, actionable protocol you can use tonight. By simply moving the machine across the room to about 8 or 10 feet away, lowering it below 50 decibels and turning it off once they're fully asleep, you completely bypass the risk of competitive inhibition. Many commercial machines exceed 70 decibels if you place them right next to the crib. So move it across the room. Try to reserve it for sleep onset rather than blasting it all night long, and prioritize this especially in the first 6 months, when the brain's plasticity is at its absolute peak. And listen, if you have been using high volumes, take a deep breath. You didn't do this wrong. The auditory cortex remains highly plastic through the second year of life, and simply reducing exposure allows the brain to rapidly catch up. The study showed progressive normalization once the acoustic environment was adjusted. You haven't caused irreparable harm. You just didn't know there was a competition happening between the uniform sound of a machine and the incredibly varied, vital sounds of life. And this brilliantly illustrates our final reframe. That embarrassing, high-pitched parentese voice you use during the day, that is the ultimate auditory curriculum. It delivers a magic that no machine could ever replicate. During their alert hours, your stretched vowels and melodic, exaggerated tones literally expand the acoustic space in your baby's brain. Your voice triggers the dopamine and oxytocin that make these language lessons stick. You are quite literally the most sophisticated language development technology in the room. Ultimately, the science leaves us with this really profound realization. In our attempt to optimize our baby's sleep with technology, we accidentally paused the very system designed to connect them to us. Your voice is the magic they're waiting for. So I have a question for you. Based on that 50 decibel threshold we talked about today, how loud and how close is your white noise machine right now? And what specific changes are you going to make tonight? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep using that beautiful parentese voice, and I'll see you in the comments.